You guys got into question of growth and long-term thoughts and like, what you want long-term, or if you even know what you want long-term. And there was like a big discussion of, are you growing it to keep growing it? Are you growing it to be more profitable and satisfy your lifestyle? Are you growing it to sell it? It seemed like nobody really knew, but did you have any changes from what you had talked about in that episode, Stephen?
It's always a question that it's hard to answer, right? Andy said it best, for a certain price, everything is for sale.
Mm-hmm.
We joked about it a couple of weeks ago. If Jeff Bezos knocked on our door, we're all for sale. Sure. Mm-hmm. You'll write us a blank check. Yes. And I guess it's at what point is that number worth it to you? Are you ready to A, move on to something else, or B, you've now packaged your business up and the prize is that, wow, someone's actually going to buy this thing that you've built. But when you get the question, Bruce, it's like, it's probably like the question like, Bruce, when do you want to have kids? I don't know, Bruce, like how would you answer that? Right. It's a question that soon, maybe, I don't know, Bruce, how would you answer that?
Chrisette actually asked me about this yesterday, and that's why I bring this up. No, it's a good question. I find that what's difficult is everybody who started a business started it because of that mentality, to grow or be on their own or whatever. I think the question is, when does that stop? And I feel like it doesn't stop until you are physically stopped from investing more into it. And maybe that's because of a growing family. Maybe that's because you're just tired. But there's something that shifts it later. Or else, when is enough enough? I don't see anybody who really started a business that would say, I'm a good here, until they hit some sort of point. I think there was some event that happened. Maybe they got exhausted or whatever happened that pivoted off that says, actually, I'm good here.
I have a hard time picturing either of you stopping, knowing you both as well as I do. I have a hard time picturing you both. Like if Bezos showed up tomorrow with a check and bought it, I'm sure you'd go for it, but I can't imagine what like 2 to 3 weeks later would look like for either of you. Like you could probably take a minute and chill, but I think you'd both go crazy not having your outlet of running your companies and like being all into that. It'd be really interesting to see how you bounce back from there.
You would totally want to start something else, but I think the question is, are businesses in our industry sellable? Like, are they transferable? Are they at a point where they're actually worth something? And I think that's a hard question to answer, because most often the owners are the operators, and they're such an important part of the business that when you remove them, you're like sucking lifeblood out of the business, and the business could turn into nothing overnight.
With I think print shops especially, I've seen that a lot, where shops like, oh yeah, I'm selling or I'm getting taken over by somebody else, we get a nice buyout, and that customer base doesn't retain, right? Once that sale happens, you lose at least usually a third, and then from there, most of the time it was a relationship build. So when I see on Facebook like, oh, I'm selling my book of clients, I'm always really, really hesitant about that, because that doesn't mean they're going to stick with you. There's no guarantee they're going to stay. So it's a good point, Steve. I don't know if a lot of print shops really are sellable unless they get to like a massive scale where it's just kind of set and repeat. But for most shops, it's really the relationship with the owner or whoever's in charge that kind of helps foster that business.
Yeah, I think if the owner is involved to the day-to-day and they play such an important role to that, your business isn't really worth much.
It's a risk to the buyer for sure.
It's a risk to the buyer, right? And so really your business is worth the equipment at liquidation value, right?
And some sort of multiple of probably sales, but it doesn't have to be a multiple up. It could be down too, right? It could be like 50% of...
Right. It could also be junk work that you don't want. I've seen some huge shops that are, doing so much contract printing on pennies that are just spinning their wheels.
Been there.
So I think it's a hard thing to think about, but I think shops should always start thinking about like, what's the exit strategy? Is it transferred to a younger owner? Like in my shoes, there was kind of a succession plan. Is it to a child? Is it to employees? I've heard and I've seen. Because the last thing you want to see your business do is fail after you leave it, right? But at the same time, you don't want to be tied to it forever. That's like a shackle. That's a shackle, literally. And I think that's, in our industry, I think we're starting to see that as older owners are saying, okay, what do I do? What do I do? And that's why there's this huge need to say, okay, how do I automate? How do I hire VAs? How do I turn this into a little bubble that I can watch instead of like be inside every day?
I think the thought is, can you grow to a point where you are an owner and not an operator? Because there is definitely a gray area of you just have to do everything. And then, you hire people to take things on, but then you really don't get there until I think you have actual managers managing contributors that you can step back a bit and be more of an owner and have probably a better lifestyle that you had imagined early on. But it could be 10 years.
I was just talking to Adam about this, who's going to be, a partner of ours, but we were talking a little bit about burnout and owner's burnout. And we've ventured into this new part of our business where we're doing a ton of Shopify and big brand management and stuff. And it's awesome. It's extremely hard. It's extremely taxing. And I was just kind of saying, like, we make a mess, we clean it up, we automate it, and then we figure out the next thing. And so, I was kind of showing him, hey, we're like 4 to 5 months out from really automating this piece of our business. And I know you're playing such an imperative role on the day-to-day of it, but there's a bigger picture. But what I was saying is you have to get to a point where you could take a month off and that part of the company can run. And until you're at that point, then you're not sustainable yet. And you're going to feel that burnout. You're going to feel overextended. You're going to feel like you're doing payroll at night, taxes in the morning, and then putting out fires all day. And that is not sustainable. That is not a healthy entrepreneurship, entrepreneur's
But
lifestyle.
you can also kind of be a little more patient when you are part ownership, right? So you talked about like having a succession plan or having employees that are also part owners, have equity in the business. I think that goes a long way when you own a small piece of the pie, even a small piece, right? It's on you to help make sure it succeeds. And I think that definitely helps drive. I mean, Stephen, if you weren't one of the owners, right, would you be working half as hard as you are? Probably not. You'd be working on 3 or 4 other things that would occupy your mind and your need to do something. So I think having people own something, even a small percentage of it, can really do a lot. So I'd be curious to see how many shops out there actually have some sort of like equity plan of saying, hey, you are part business owner in this. Let's try to ramp you up, because I think that would definitely have a lot of help with getting them to knuckle down, do the work, and actually understand there was a plan to execute and not just show up day in and day out and just clock in and clock out.
I might disagree a little bit. I was actually talking to Jed a little bit about this, and he said, bars do this a lot, where like they'll take the GM who they really like and say, all right, you're an owner now. You better be here all the time from open to close to 3 a.m. to whatever. And then all of a sudden the building needs a new roof or the air conditioner goes out. Well, you just gave that person equity, and now you're going to say, hey, I need you to come pay for this, or you have to come help me out with this. I don't know if it's up to the employees to necessarily have to deal with that or have to be invested in that, because you could also dangle a carrot out that never pays off. Right? I think it might even be better to have really, really strong like KPIs, a really strong tracking system and a scoreboard and metrics, and then incentivizing your team and rewarding them, right? So if it's your production manager, it's, on, cost of goods and profitability and output, and making sure there's like really good bonus involved. I was talking to Bruce about this, like in the trading world, stock traders and people that work in fintech, they're paid out huge bonuses totally based on performances, and oftentimes they never own a piece of the company, but they're well tracked and well compensated. I don't know. Bruce, what do you think?
It's interesting. When I first tried to implement traction, I gave everybody a different number, and we talked about that number every single week in our weekly meetings with that department. And people after the second or third week began to talk about their number like it was their little baby almost. Specifically on customer care, there's two metrics. One is average customer response time, and then we also said answered phone calls to total phone calls received ratio. And people would bring these numbers up again and again, like, oh, shoot, but that's going to hurt. First response time, what do you think? Is that okay or not? And when people started to bring that up, it was really interesting because they did care a lot about it. But I do think for us in the software world, there's pieces, I feel like, of a pie to create strong employee motivation. Part of it is that ownership aspect. Part of it is the freedom and autonomy to like do stuff that they find is valuable. I think part of it is definitely compensation. I mean, we are in a competitive space. And then part of it is we did create like an equity pool for, Matt and for everybody else at Printavo to participate in. That equity doesn't mean anything, truthfully, unless the company, bonuses out distributions or something, like purchases it back, or somebody purchases the company, or technically if it goes public. I don't think we're doing that. So
Printavo IPO.
But like my thought was I did want everybody to think more aligned, so when you have three options, of what should I be doing today, that you're very aligned with the same motivation that I'm thinking of. Is it perfect? No, but I thought that slice of giving out was worth more as we continue to grow the company. That was our thought. But the other side is we are also in a very competitive world with engineering talent and hiring technical talent. And so you do have to offer quite a bit to attract good people.